Dr. Amy Martinez walked into the main conference room of the starship Starbound with her tablet in hand. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Today was her turn to share human culture with the alien crew members. The cultural exchange. Program was new, and Amy wanted to make a good impression. The room was filled with beings from different worlds. The Valerian elves sat gracefully in their chairs, their crystal-like skin catching the light from the ceiling panels. Their leader, Chief Science Officer Lyra Lay Moonwhisper, had long silver hair that seemed to float around her shoulders. Her purple eyes watched Amy with what looked like polite interest. On the other side of the room sat the Zephyrians. These insect-like aliens had dark green shells and large compound eyes. Their representative, Zaxth, made soft clicking sounds as she communicated with her hive-mind sisters through telepathy. The sounds always made Amy think of rainfall on metal. Amy cleared her throat and began her presentation. She had decided to share some of Earth's most famous stories about monsters and supernatural creatures. These tales had been part of human culture for thousands of years. Today, I want to tell you about the creatures from human folklore, Amy said, activating her tablet's display screen. Images of vampires, werewolves, and demons appeared on the wall. These beings have shaped our culture and our fears for generations. She started with vampires, explaining how humans believed these creatures drank blood and could not be seen in mirrors. She told them about wooden stakes through the heart and how garlic could keep vampires away. The alien audience listened quietly, but Amy noticed some strange looks passing between them. Next, she described werewolves, humans who turned into wolves during full moons. She explained how only silver bullets could kill them and how they lost all human reason when transformed. The Zephyrians' clicking sounds became faster, which Amy had learned meant they were discussing something among themselves. Amy continued with demons, evil spirits that possessed human bodies and caused terrible things to happen. She talked about exorcisms and holy water, ancient rituals used to drive these creatures away. She showed them pictures from old books and movies that depicted these supernatural beings. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Amy looked around hopefully, waiting for questions or comments. She had expected curiosity about these fascinating parts of human culture. Lyra Lai was the first to speak. Her voice was musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "These stories are quite charming," she said with a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "They show such primitive imagination. It is interesting how young species create these tales to explain things they do not understand." The comment stung, but Amy tried to stay positive. "Actually, these stories serve important cultural functions," she explained. "They teach moral lessons and help humans deal with their fears." Zaxth's compound eyes focused on Amy when she spoke. Her voice came through a translator device that made her words sound flat and mechanical. "Our hive mind has analyzed your data. These creatures violate all known laws of biology and physics. They cannot exist in reality. Your species appears to have developed irrational fear responses to imaginary threats." Amy felt her cheeks getting warm. "But that's not the point," she said. "These stories aren't meant to be scientifically accurate. They're cultural expressions that help define human identity and values." Another Valerian, a tall male with blue-tinted skin, laughed softly. "Perhaps humans should focus on more enlightened pursuits now that they have joined galactic civilization. These dark fantasies seem unhealthy for mental development." The Zephyrians clicked in what Amy recognized as agreement. Zaxth added, "Our worlds evolved without such supernatural nonsense. We have always dealt with reality in logical, rational ways. These monster stories suggest serious psychological instability in human development." Amy tried once more to explain the importance of mythology and folklore, but she could see she was losing her audience. The Valerians' telepathic abilities allowed them to share thoughts silently, and Amy suspected they were discussing how backward humans seemed. The Zephyrians' clicking grew quieter, which usually meant they were becoming bored. Lyra Lai stood up gracefully, her movements flowing like water. "Thank you for this presentation, Dr. Martinez. It has been very educational about human psychology. Perhaps in future exchanges you could share something more scientific or artistic from your culture." The other aliens began filing out of the room, making polite goodbye sounds but clearly eager to leave. Amy stood alone with her tablet, watching her carefully prepared presentation disappear from the wall screen. She had hoped to bridge cultural gaps, but instead felt like she had made them wider. As she gathered her materials, Amy heard two young Valerian engineers talking in the hallway. Their voices carried back into the conference room. "Can you believe? Humans actually frighten themselves with stories about blood-drinking corpses," one said. "Their evolutionary development must have been very traumatic," the other replied. "No wonder they seem so anxious all the time." Amy sat back down heavily in her chair. She had been so excited to share the rich storytelling tradition of her people, but the aliens saw only primitive superstition. They viewed humans as intellectually inferior, a species that wasted time on impossible fantasies instead of embracing rational thought. The worst part was that Amy could understand their perspective. From the outside, human monster stories probably did seem ridiculous. The Valerians had evolved on peaceful worlds with abundant resources and natural telepathic abilities that helped them solve conflicts peacefully. The Zephyrians lived in perfect harmony through their hive-mind connection, sharing knowledge instantly across their entire species. But humans had grown up on a harsh world, fighting for survival against nature and each other. Maybe these dark stories really were just evolutionary baggage from humanity's violent past. Maybe the aliens were right to dismiss them as primitive nonsense. Amy finally stood up and headed for the door. Tomorrow she would have to face her colleagues again, knowing they saw her and all humans as intellectually backward. The cultural exchange program suddenly seemed like a mistake. How could humans ever gain respect among species that had evolved beyond the need for scary stories about monsters in the dark? She walked down the corridor toward her quarters, past groups of aliens who politely nodded, but clearly saw her as a curiosity rather than an equal. Amy wondered if humans would ever truly belong in this galactic civilization, or if they would always be seen as the primitive species with overactive imaginations and irrational fears. 3 weeks had passed since Amy's embarrassing presentation, and life aboard the Starbound had returned to its normal routine. The alien crew members remained polite but distant, and Amy threw herself into her work studying xenobiology samples from various worlds they visited. She was in her laboratory examining Zephyrian plant specimens when the ship's communication system crackled to life. Communications Officer Lisa Thompson's voice echoed through the corridors with unusual urgency. "All senior staff report to the bridge immediately. We have received a priority distress signal." Amy set down her microscope and hurried toward the bridge. As the ship's xenobiologist, she was considered senior staff, even though the aliens sometimes treated her like a junior researcher. The corridors buzzed with activity as crew members moved quickly to their stations. The bridge was a large, circular room with a massive view screen dominating the front wall. Captain Lyreley stood at the center, her silver hair flowing as she turned to address the arriving officers. The Zephyrian tactical officer Zakth was already at her console, her compound eyes reflecting data streams from multiple screens. "We have received a distress call from the mining colony on Kepler 442c, Lyreley announced. The transmission was fragmented and difficult to understand. Lisa, please replay what we captured." Lisa Thompson, a young human with short brown hair, worked at her communication station. Static filled the air, followed by a weak human voice that cut in and out of clarity. "This is Kepler Mining Station calling any Federation vessel. We have a serious situation here. Something is wrong. The miners are reporting strange things, shadows that move when no one is there. Equipment failing for no reason. People are disappearing from their quarters at night." The transmission dissolved into static, then another voice broke through. "The symbols on the walls are changing. They shouldn't be able to do that. Dr. Brooks says we found something we weren't supposed to find. Something old, very old. We need immediate evacuation. These things, they shouldn't exist, but they do." The final clear words sent chills down Amy's spine. The stories were true. All of them were true. Then silence. Lyreley's purple eyes showed concern as she processed the information. "How far are we from Kepler 442c? 18 hours at maximum warp," reported the navigation officer. "Set course immediately. Priority 1, emergency speed." Lyreley turned to address the assembled staff. "I want all departments to prepare for a possible evacuation mission. We don't know what we're dealing with, but clearly the colonists are in serious danger. Amy felt a strange chill when she heard the phrase, "the stories were true." It reminded her uncomfortably of her recent presentation about human folklore. She tried to push the feeling away, telling herself it was just coincidence. The next 18 hours passed slowly. Amy tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept returning to those words from the transmission. The mining colony had been established 2 years ago to extract rare minerals from the planet's crust. It was supposed to be a routine operation, with no unusual dangers. When they finally arrived at Kepler 442c, the bridge crew gathered around the main view screen to assess the situation. The planet looked normal from orbit, a brown and gray world with minimal atmosphere. The mining stations were visible as small dots of light on the surface, but something was wrong with the orbital platforms. They should have been brightly lit and bustling with activity. Instead, they hung dark and silent in space like abandoned shells. "I'm reading minimal life signs," Zakth reported from her tactical station. "The orbital stations appear to be completely empty. All life signs are concentrated in the underground mining complex." "What about communication?" Lyreley asked. Lisa shook her head. "Nothing. All communication arrays are functional, but nobody is responding to our hails." Chief Engineer Kate Wilson, another human crew member, studied her sensor readings with a puzzled expression. "I'm detecting some very strange energy signatures from the mining complex. The patterns don't match any known technology or natural phenomena. It's almost like the energy is moving in organized patterns." Amy felt that chill again. Organized energy patterns that didn't match known science sounded uncomfortably familiar. She thought about the stories she had shared weeks ago, tales of supernatural forces that operated outside natural laws. "I recommend we send down an away team to investigate," Lyreley decided. "The colonists are clearly in some kind of trouble, and we need to determine what kind of assistance they require." The away team was quickly assembled. Lyreley would lead, accompanied by Amy as the xenobiologist Lisa to handle communications, Kate for engineering support, and several Valerian and Zephyrian security personnel. They equipped themselves with standard exploration gear and medical supplies. The shuttle ride down to the planet's surface was tense. Through the small windows, they could see the mining complex below, a collection of buildings and towers surrounding, large excavation sites. Some lights were still on, but many areas remained dark. They landed at the main platform and immediately noticed something unsettling. Equipment was scattered around as if people had dropped everything and run. Hover carts filled with ore samples sat abandoned in the middle of pathways. Tools lay on the ground next to partially completed tasks. "This looks like a hasty evacuation," Kate observed, picking up a dropped scanner device. "But why would they leave so much valuable equipment behind?" As they walked toward the main administrative building, Amy noticed something that made her stomach clench with worry. Scratched into the metal walls were symbols that looked ancient and somehow wrong. They seemed to twist and change when she looked at them directly, making her eyes water. "Those symbols," she said quietly to Lisa. "Do you recognize them?" Lisa studied the markings and shook her head. "They're not in any database I know. They look very old, but also somehow fresh, like they were just carved." Zakth approached the symbols with her scanner. Suddenly she jerked back with a sharp clicking sound of distress. "Something is interfering with my hive mind connection. I cannot reach my sisters clearly. The interference is strongest near these markings." Lyreley's telepathic abilities were also being affected. She pressed her hand to her forehead with obvious discomfort. "I sense great fear and confusion from somewhere nearby, but I cannot locate the source. Something is actively blocking my mental abilities." They entered the administrative building and found it empty, but with clear signs of recent occupation. Coffee cups sat half-empty on desks. Computer screens still glowed with unfinished work. Personal belongings were scattered around as if people had grabbed only essentials before fleeing. In the main office, they found video logs left by Dr. Rachel Brooks, the colony's chief archaeologist. Amy activated the playback system, and Rachel's worried face appeared on the screen. "Day 15, since we breached the sealed chamber in mining shaft 7. Whatever we found down there, it wasn't natural mineral deposits. The artifacts we discovered appear to be millions of years old, but they're affecting people in ways I can't explain. The miners report nightmares every night. Some claim to see moving shadows that disappear when they look directly at them. The log continued with increasing desperation in Rachel's voice. The symbols on the artifacts keep changing. That should be impossible, but I've documented it with multiple cameras. More disturbing, similar symbols are appearing on walls throughout the complex. No one is carving them. They just appear. Amy exchanged worried glances with Lisa as the final log played. Rachel looked exhausted and frightened. Whatever civilization left these artifacts, they were trying to contain something. We've broken seals that were meant to stay closed forever. I think we've released something that should never have been disturbed. Something that makes our worst nightmares look like pleasant dreams. The away team descended deeper into the mining complex, following the maintenance tunnels towards Shaft 7, where Dr. Brooks had made her disturbing discovery. The artificial lighting grew dimmer as they went lower, and their portable lamps cast dancing shadows on the metal walls. Amy noticed that the strange symbols became more frequent the deeper they went. What had started as occasional markings on the upper levels now covered entire wall sections. The symbols seemed to pulse, with their own faint light, and looking at them too long made her feel dizzy and nauseous. Lyra Lay's telepathic distress was getting worse. She stumbled occasionally and pressed her hands to her temples. "The mental interference is becoming overwhelming," she said through gritted teeth. "I feel like something is screaming inside my mind, but I cannot understand what it's trying to communicate." Zach was having similar problems with her hive mind connection. The normally calm Zephyrian clicked rapidly in agitation. "My connection to the collective is breaking down. This has never happened before. We are designed to maintain contact across vast distances, but something here is actively jamming our mental links." They reached Shaft 7 and found the entrance to a newly excavated chamber. The mining equipment sat abandoned around a large hole that had been blasted through ancient rock. Warning signs were posted everywhere, but someone had clearly ignored them and entered the sealed space. Kate checked her engineering scanner and frowned. "The energy readings are off the charts down there. Whatever is in that chamber is generating massive amounts of power, but it's not registering as any known energy type." Amy pulled up Dr. Brooks's archaeological notes on her tablet. According to her research, this chamber was sealed with some kind of metallic substance that took them weeks to cut through. The walls inside are covered with artifacts that appear to be both technological and ritualistic. They activated their helmet lights and entered the ancient chamber. The sight that greeted them defied logical explanation. The walls were covered with crystalline structures that pulsed with soft, unnatural light. Strange mechanical devices that looked more grown than built were embedded in the stone. Most disturbing of all were the symbols that covered every surface, moving and shifting like living things. Lisa's communication equipment began picking up strange signals. "I'm getting audio transmissions from somewhere in this chamber, but they're not coming from any human sources. The patterns are too complex for any known language." In the center of the chamber stood a large crystalline formation that had been partially excavated. Around its base were scattered artifacts that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once, creating optical illusions that made everyone's eyes water. Amy approached one of the artifacts carefully. It looked like a mirror, but her reflection showed something different than what she expected. Instead of her own face, she saw a pale figure with elongated fangs and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. "Don't look directly at the artifacts," she warned the others quickly. "They're showing us things that aren't real, or maybe things that shouldn't be real." As if responding to her words, the chamber suddenly filled with a low humming sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The symbols began glowing brighter, and the crystalline structures pulsed faster. Then something moved in the shadows at the far end of the chamber. It stepped into their light slowly, and Amy's heart nearly stopped. The creature matched perfectly the descriptions of vampires from human folklore. It was tall and pale with impossibly sharp teeth and eyes that reflected light like an animal's. But this was no story or imagination. This thing was real and standing right in front of them. The vampire creature spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "So long have we waited for the seals to weaken. So long have we hungered for the taste of fresh terror." Lyra Lay screamed as the creature's presence sent psychic feedback through her telepathic abilities. The mental attack was so powerful that she collapsed to her knees, clutching her head in agony. Her normally graceful movements became jerky and uncontrolled. Zach's hive mind connection completely severed under the psychic assault. For a Zephyrian to lose contact with the collective was like a human losing their sense of sight and hearing simultaneously. She made distressed clicking sounds and stumbled blindly around the chamber. The vampire moved with impossible speed, crossing the chamber in the blink of an eye. Its claws, sharp as metal blades, slashed at Kate's engineering equipment. Sparks flew as sophisticated Federation technology was destroyed by what should have been primitive supernatural nonsense. Amy found herself thinking clearly despite the chaos around her. Something about this creature felt familiar, not just from the stories she had told weeks ago, but from something deeper. Some instinctive part of her mind recognized this threat and knew how to respond. "Everyone stay calm," she called out, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Don't look directly into its eyes. Keep moving and don't let it corner you." The advice came naturally, as if she had known it her whole life. These weren't random suggestions, but survival knowledge that felt encoded in her very genes. Lisa was trying desperately to contact the ship, but her communication equipment was malfunctioning. "All our technology is failing," she reported. "The energy from this chamber is interfering with everything." More movement in the shadows caught Amy's attention. Additional creatures were emerging from hidden alcoves around the chamber. She saw something that looked like the werewolves from human stories, but larger and more terrifying than any tale had described. Its eyes glowed yellow in the darkness, and its breath created visible clouds in the cold air. Another shadow resolved into something that had no clear form, a shifting darkness that seemed to absorb light around it. Amy recognized it as the type of demon that human folklore described as pure evil, a creature that existed only to cause suffering and fear. The aliens' advanced minds, trained for logical thinking and peaceful problem-solving, were completely overwhelmed by these supernatural threats. Lyralay's telepathic abilities had become a liability, allowing the creatures to attack her mind directly. Zakth's dependence on the hive mind left her isolated and confused without her collective consciousness. But Amy found that her human mind was adapting to the situation. The same cultural background that the aliens had dismissed as primitive. Superstition was now providing her with valuable survival information. She knew instinctively not to show fear to the werewolf creature, that the shadow demon would try to separate them from each other, and that the vampire could be temporarily blinded by bright light. "Kate, can you overload your scanner to create a bright flash?" Amy asked urgently. Kate, despite her terror, managed to adjust her device settings. When the vampire lunged toward them again, she triggered the overload. Brilliant white light filled the chamber, and the vampire recoiled with a shriek of pain and anger. The momentary advantage gave them time to move toward the chamber entrance, but Amy realized with growing dread that this was only the beginning. The creatures were testing them, learning about their capabilities and weaknesses. Worse, she could see that more seals around the chamber were beginning to crack and glow. Whatever ancient civilization had imprisoned these nightmares had built multiple layers of containment, and they were all failing, one by one. Amy helped Lyralay to her feet, while Lisa supported the disoriented Zakth. The alien crew members who had dismissed human monster stories as primitive nonsense were now face to face with the living reality of humanity's darkest myths. As they retreated from the chamber, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly what the stories had been trying to warn them about. Humanity's folklore wasn't primitive imagination, but ancient memory, genetic knowledge passed down through generations about real threats that had once stalked their ancestors. The question now was whether that same cultural wisdom would be enough to save them all from the nightmares that were awakening in the depths of Kepler 442c. The retreat from the ancient chamber became a running battle as more creatures emerged from the failing seals. Amy led the group through the mining tunnels while supernatural horrors pursued them through the darkness. The confident, technologically advanced aliens who had dismissed human folklore were now completely dependent on Amy's instinctive knowledge of monster behavior. Lisa tried desperately to reach the ship through her damaged communicator. "Starbound, this is away team. We need immediate extraction. Hostile entities are present. Repeat, we have confirmed hostile entities." Static answered her calls. The creature's presence was interfering with all their advanced technology, leaving them isolated in the underground complex with nowhere to run. Behind them, the werewolf creature howled with a sound that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Amy knew from human stories that werewolves hunted in packs, which meant more were probably coming. The shadow demon flowed along the walls like liquid darkness, trying to get ahead of them and cut off their escape route. Stay in the center of the corridor, Amy instructed the group. Don't let the shadows get between us and keep talking to each other. That thing feeds on isolation and fear. Lyrelei was still suffering from psychic feedback, but she managed to ask, "How do you know? These things? Your species has never encountered such creatures before?" "Yes, we have," Amy replied, helping Kate navigate around a pile of abandoned mining equipment. "Our ancestors survived by learning how to recognize and fight these things. The stories weren't imagination. They were survival guides." They reached a wider area where several tunnel routes converged. Amy made them stop to catch their breath and assess their situation. The creatures were still following but keeping their distance, as if they were being careful not to damage their prey too badly. Zack had partially recovered from losing her hive mind connection, but she was clearly disoriented. "This violates everything we know about reality. How can creatures exist that operate outside natural laws?" "Maybe they don't operate outside natural laws," Amy suggested. "Maybe we just don't understand the laws they follow. The ancient civilization that sealed them obviously had technology advanced enough to create or control supernatural entities. Kate's engineering scanner was barely functional, but it was still detecting massive energy buildups throughout the complex. Whatever those seals were made of, they're failing rapidly. I'm reading energy spikes from at least 12 different locations." As if to confirm her words, a new sound echoed through the tunnels. It was a wet, sliding noise that made everyone's skin crawl. Something large was moving through the corridors above them, something that didn't walk on solid feet. Amy felt her genetic memory responding to the sound. "Shapeshifter," she said quietly. "Something that can change its form to look like people we trust. Don't believe anything you see until we're sure it's real." The advice proved valuable when Lisa's voice called to them from a side tunnel. "Over here! I found a safe room with working communication equipment." But Amy noticed that Lisa was supposed to be standing right next to her. The real Lisa raised her communicator and pointed it toward the false voice. "That's not me. I'm right. Here." The fake Lisa's voice became distorted and angry. "Clever little humans, you know too much about our ways." More seals were breaking throughout the complex. Amy could hear different types of creatures moving in the tunnels around them. Some made scraping sounds like claws on metal. Others moved silently, detectable only by the way the air pressure changed when they passed by. Dr. Maria Santos contacted them through Lisa's damaged communicator. She was the ship's chief medical officer and had been monitoring their mission from orbit. "Away, team. We're reading massive energy surges from your location. What's your status?" "We need immediate evacuation of all colonists," Amy responded. "The situation is worse than we thought. We're dealing with entities that our standard protocols can't handle." Maria's voice crackled through the static. "I've been analyzing the colonists we rescued from the orbital platforms. They're all suffering from severe psychological trauma. They keep talking about things that shouldn't exist, creatures from human mythology. The medical bay is full of people who claim they saw vampires and werewolves." Amy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold tunnels. "How many colonists are still in the underground complex?" 43 life signs, scattered throughout different levels. "But Amy, some of them are moving in patterns that don't make sense. It's like they're being controlled by something else." The group pressed forward through the tunnels, but their situation was becoming more desperate. The creatures were getting bolder, testing their defenses more aggressively. The vampire had appeared twice more, its red eyes gleaming in their flashlight beams before vanishing back into shadow. When they reached the main elevator shaft, they found their path blocked by something that made Lyrelei scream in telepathic agony. It looked like a massive spider, but its body was made of the same shifting shadow material as the demon they had encountered earlier. Worse, it had human faces embedded in its dark surface, faces that Amy recognized from the colonist identification. Files. "It's absorbing people," Kate whispered in horror. "Those faces belong to missing colonists." The spider creature spoke with multiple voices, all of them human colonists pleading for help. "Please don't leave us. It hurts so much. We can't escape. Please help us." Amy knew this was another trap, but the realistic voices of suffering people made it almost impossible to ignore. This was psychological warfare designed to exploit human compassion and turn it into a weakness. "Those aren't the real colonists," she told the group firmly. "The real people are already dead or transformed. Don't listen to the voices." But Lyralee's telepathic abilities were picking up genuine human distress signals mixed with the creature's deceptions. "I can sense real, human minds trapped within that thing. Some of the colonists are still alive inside it, being used as psychological weapons." The moral complexity of the situation was paralyzing the alien crew members. Their advanced ethical systems couldn't process the idea of sacrificing innocent people to escape supernatural threats. Human folklore had prepared Amy for exactly this type of impossible choice. "We can't save them right now," Amy said, hating the words even as she spoke them. "Our priority has to be preventing these things from escaping the planet and spreading throughout the galaxy." She found herself taking charge of the group, making tactical decisions based on knowledge she hadn't known she possessed. The same cultural background that aliens considered primitive was now their only hope for survival. Amy led them through maintenance shafts that the larger creatures couldn't navigate, using routes that her instincts told her would be safer. She knew which areas to avoid based on subtle environmental cues that her evolved human senses could detect, but alien sensory organs missed. When they finally reached the surface level, they found the mining complex in chaos. Emergency lights flashed red throughout the facility. Automated systems were reporting containment failures at multiple locations. Most terrifying of all, they could see creatures moving freely through the upper levels, no longer confined to the ancient chamber below. Amy realized that they were witnessing the awakening of an entire ecosystem of supernatural predators that had been dormant for millions of years. These things had once hunted humanity's ancestors, shaping human evolution and cultural development through countless generations of survival pressure. Now they were free again, and only the descendants of their ancient prey understood how to fight them. Amy stood in the main control room of the mining facility, studying the ancient containment systems while chaos erupted around them. The creatures were spreading throughout the complex, and more seals were failing every hour. She knew they had only one chance to prevent these nightmares from escaping into the galaxy. Dr. Maria Santos had managed to evacuate most of the surviving colonists to the ship, but 43 people were still trapped in the lower levels. Worse, Amy's scans showed that the main containment seal was weakening rapidly. If it failed completely, the creatures would be able to leave the planet. Lisa worked frantically at the communication station, trying to coordinate with the Starbound, while dodging the shadow creatures that kept attacking their equipment. "The ship is requesting permission to use orbital bombardment to sterilize the facility," she reported. "That won't work," Amy replied, pointing to her analysis of the ancient technology. "These containment systems are connected to the planet's core. Destroying the facility might actually make things worse by damaging the deeper seals." Kate studied the engineering readouts with growing alarm. Amy's right. The entire planetary crust is riddled with containment chambers. If we damage the wrong systems, we could release things that make these creatures look harmless. Lyralee had partially recovered from the psychic attacks, though she still winced whenever the telepathic interference spiked. "What do you suggest?" "We do? Our weapons and technology are largely useless against these entities." Amy had been thinking about this problem since they first encountered the creatures. The ancient civilization that had built these prisons had obviously known how to control supernatural entities. Their technology worked by combining scientific principles with what humans would recognize as magical or ritual practices. "The containment system isn't just technological," Amy explained. "It's also ritualistic. The symbols, the crystalline structures, the specific patterns of energy flow. This civilization understood that fighting supernatural creatures requires more than just advanced science." She pulled up the colonist records on her tablet, focusing on Dr. Rachel Brooks's archaeological notes. Rachel documented everything before she disappeared. The ancient builders didn't just trap these creatures with force fields and energy barriers. They used psychological and spiritual containment methods too. Zach clicked nervously as she processed this information. "You are suggesting that we must engage in primitive ritual behavior to repair advanced technology. This seems highly illogical." "It only seems illogical because we don't understand the science behind it," Amy replied. "But human folklore preserves knowledge about how to fight these things. Banishment rituals, protective circles, specific words and actions that can force supernatural entities back into containment." A new alarm sounded throughout the facility. The main containment seal was beginning to crack, and Amy could see dark energy leaking through the fissures. They had perhaps an hour before complete failure. Amy made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'm going back down to the main chamber. The containment ritual has to be performed from the original seal point." "That's suicide," Kate protested. "The creature concentration is highest down there." "Maybe," Amy admitted. "But I'm the only one here who understands both the technology and the folklore needed to make this work. Human cultural knowledge is our only advantage." Lisa stepped forward. "I'm going with you. You'll need someone to handle the technical interface while you focus on the ritual aspects." Maria Santos's voice came through the communicator. "I'm sending down medical supplies and some equipment that might help. I've been analyzing the colonist testimonies, and several of them mention specific items that seem to repel the creatures." Amy felt a surge of hope. "What kind of items?" "Silver jewelry, religious symbols, mirrors, and anything that produces bright ultraviolet light. It matches some of the protective elements from human folklore that you presented weeks ago." The irony wasn't lost on Amy. The same cultural knowledge that the aliens had dismissed as primitive superstition was now their salvation. She gathered what supplies they could find and prepared for the descent back into the chamber where this nightmare had begun. The journey down was even more dangerous than before. Creatures stalked them through every corridor. But Amy noticed something important. Her confidence was growing with each encounter. The genetic memory that human evolution had encoded in her brain was activating fully, giving her instinctive knowledge about supernatural threats. When they reached the ancient chamber, Amy saw that the situation was worse than she had feared. The main crystalline structure was cracked down its entire length, and the symbols on the walls were glowing so brightly they hurt to look at directly. But Amy also noticed something the aliens had missed. The symbols weren't random or chaotic. They followed patterns that matched rituals from human folklore. The ancient civilization had built their containment system using the same principles that human culture had preserved in stories and traditions. Amy positioned herself at the center of the chamber while Lisa worked on the technological interface. The ritual required perfect timing and coordination between the scientific and folklore elements. "Beginning containment sequence," Amy announced, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was doing. Something deeper than conscious knowledge was guiding her actions. She began speaking words that came naturally to her mind, phrases from various human languages that seemed to resonate with the chamber's energy patterns. The creatures that had been approaching stopped as if held back by invisible barriers. Lisa coordinated the technical aspects, synchronizing the ancient machinery with Amy's ritual timing. "Energy patterns are stabilizing," she reported. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." The most difficult part came when Amy had to confront the creatures directly. The vampire entity that had first attacked them materialized in front of her, its red eyes blazing with fury. "You cannot contain us again, little human. We are eternal. We are inevitable." But Amy found that she wasn't afraid anymore. Her human mind, shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure from these same creatures, was perfectly designed to resist their psychological attacks. "You're not eternal," she replied calmly. "You're parasites. You need fear and suffering to survive, and I'm not giving you either." The vampire's form began to waver as Amy continued the banishment ritual. One by one, the other creatures were drawn back into their containment fields. The ancient seals reformed, stronger than before, reinforced by the combination of advanced technology and human cultural wisdom. When the last creature vanished and the chamber fell silent, Amy collapsed from exhaustion. Lisa helped her to her feet as the containment systems settled into stable operation. The journey back to the surface felt like awakening from a nightmare. The facility was quiet again, with only the normal sounds of machinery and ventilation systems. On the ship later, Amy found herself in an unusual position. The alien crew members who had dismissed human folklore were now treating her with deep respect and genuine curiosity. Lyra Lay approached her in the ship's recreational area, where Amy was trying to process everything that had happened. "Dr. Martinez, I owe you an apology. We were wrong to dismiss your cultural knowledge as primitive superstition." You weren't wrong to be skeptical, Amy replied. From your perspective, the stories really did sound like nonsense. But human evolution took a very different path than yours. We developed in a universe where these threats were real. Zakth joined the conversation, her clicking sounds now respectful rather than dismissive. The hive mind has been analyzing the data from our mission. We now understand that human folklore represents a sophisticated database of survival information encoded in cultural memory. Amy smiled, remembering her embarrassment during the original presentation. Every vampire story, every werewolf legend, every tale about demons and monsters, they were all warnings passed down through generations about real dangers our ancestors faced. The Galactic Federation's response to Amy's report was immediate and dramatic. Human cultural specialists were assigned to all exploration vessels. Earth's folklore was classified as crucial scientific data. Most importantly, humanity's status in the Federation changed from junior member to essential partner. Amy found herself appointed as the Federation's first director of xenological threat assessment, a position created specifically to study the intersection between human folklore and galactic security threats. In her new role, Amy established protocols for identifying and containing supernatural threats based on human cultural knowledge. She created training programs that taught alien species how to recognize signs of supernatural activity and how to implement human-derived countermeasures. The mining colony on Kepler 4042c became a restricted research facility where scientists from multiple species studied the ancient containment technology. They learned that the universe contained threats that couldn't be defeated through conventional science alone. Amy often thought about the irony of her situation. The same cultural presentation that had embarrassed her and made her feel inferior had ultimately revealed humanity's greatest strength. Human stories about monsters weren't signs of primitive fear, but evidence of sophisticated survival wisdom developed over millions of years.